All right, so let's get to it with Amazon S3 and utilizing SDKs, as we've done a lot of different programming things with S3. We've done PowerShell scripting, Bash scripting. We know the difference between the S3 CLI and the S3 API. And so one of the most common ways of interacting with AWS services, and specifically S3, is by using software development kits. This allows you to use your favorite programming language to interact with the cloud service provider API. AWS has probably the largest selection of languages that in SDKs that you can use. And they even have my favorite, which is Ruby, and we will be using Ruby today, as well as Java, one of my lesser favorite languages. But I think it's very important as a cloud engineer or DevOps engineer or any technical role that you're comfortable with any of these languages. You don't have to be an expert in them, but you need to be productive. And so I think that we're just going to keep mixing it up every time we have a chance to use an SDK. So maybe in one we'll use PHP, we'll see. But let's go ahead over to the AWS Examples website. I'm opening this up in Gitpod. Of course, use whichever cloud developer environment or local developer environment that you want to use, but just understand that you may need to provide your own configuration or make your life easy and utilize Gitpod as well, which also has a generous free tier. All the configurations are set up in the Gitpod YAML file, and they're already installing them in. So on the right-hand side, you can see these are installing. We have the AWS CLI. I already have my environment variables set in here, my AWS credentials. So that is something that you'll need to do. But anyway, what I'm going to do is go on the left-hand side here. We're going to make a new folder called SDK. And within that folder, we're going to make a new two new folders, one called Ruby, and the other one will be called, this one will be called Java. So let's go ahead and work through some Ruby code. Ruby is not going to be too hard here. So the idea is we'll need a Ruby file. So the Ruby file we'll just call it s3.rb. And we're also going to need a gem file. So the way Ruby works is it has a package manager called bundler, and its commands are called bundle. Now this machine already has Ruby installed. I can just go here and type in Ruby version. It also has Java installed. So understand that you might have to install these on your systems. This one's using 3.2.2, so that's really good. I want to go ahead and create a gem file. So we'll use bundler to do that. So I'm going to go and just cd into the SDK Ruby directory here. I'm going to say bundle init, and that's going to create me a gem file. So in this gem file, it is pointing to Ruby gems. Ruby gems is where it gets its libraries from. So we're going to install a few here. The first, we'll close the editor here, but the first is going to be the gem AWS SDK S3. I believe that's what it is. I'm going to also want pry for debugging. That is a debugging tool for making breakpoints in Ruby, very useful. And I think we have to install Nokogiri or it's going to complain. Nokogiri is it's for parsing things like parsing XML. So when you're working with APIs and going out to the internet, they need some kind of parsing library. And you get to choose whichever one you want. Nokogiri is the classic one for that. But yeah, Ruby utilizes a modular SDK. A lot of these ones do that. I believe Java does that as well. I think they do. Well, yeah, I guess they would because you include packages separately. We saw with PowerShell that it was modular. But yeah, that's usually the approach. Just include what you want. But we can go over to the Ruby tab here, and we can go over to AWS SDK for Ruby. I think they're on version 3 now. So if we go into the API reference docs, over here, I would say that the reference docs are good based on what is good for your language. So Ruby is really good for languages. Python is pretty decent. Java is horrendously bad. But it just depends on the culture and how documentation is generated out. But you can see that there is modular libraries here. So you have to kind of know what they are. Or you probably could just go to the Ruby SDK on GitHub, AWS Ruby SDK GitHub, because it is a public repo. And I'm not sure how I know which ones are which, but somewhere here they list them. Yeah, they're all here. So here's all the possible libraries that we could modularly install. I'm only, again, interested in the AWS SDK S3. So now that we have these 3 libraries defined in our gem file, I'm going to go down below here and type in bundle install. That's going to go out to the internet, pull down those gems. Gems are what Ruby calls packages, and they're now installed. So we can go ahead over to our s3.rb file, and we'll write some code here. So we'll do a require AWS SDK S3. We'll do a require pry, and I'm going to also require a secure random. So secure random, we did install that. It's just built in as a standard library, and this is so we can generate out like random values. I want to bring in a bucket. So, because again, we're working with S3, and so what I want to do is maybe create a bucket and put some files in it. So we're going to take that as an environment variable. So when you want to take environment variables in, you just type in env in all cases and then square braces, and that will be accepted into this program. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a puts, and let's just test this out so far and make sure that we're in good shape. The way it works in Ruby is when you want things to be executed in the context of the packages you installed, you put bundle exec in front of here, then the program you want to run, so just Ruby, and we'll say s3.rb, and we'll go ahead and hit enter. And so notice it's not outputting anything. That's because we have yet to set a environment variable called bucket name. So I'm going to go here and just type this in. I'm going to say my cool bucket, like this, and we'll hit enter. And so basically that environment variable is being executed in the context of this line, and it gets passed in here and it gets printed out there. So very useful so far. Now the next thing I want to do is actually go ahead and create ourselves a bucket. So we'll go back over to our code, and we'll go over here on the left to look for S3. So here it is. And in S3, we are going to find a bunch of things. As you can see bucket here, but we actually want client because we first need to create ourselves a client to work with S3. I'm going to go over here and just paste this in. Now, you notice it's asking for like a credentials object. So here there's actually another thing you can create here, a credentials object, pass it in here. But our credentials in this environment is being loaded in from environment variables. Generally, AWS will recommend to use the credentials file, the hidden.aws/credentials file. We're not doing that because that's not the best practice when working with Gitpod. So it's just going to vary based on what you are doing. So both the credentials and region are already set via the environment variable, so I don't need to set those there. So we'll just ignore that. And the next thing I want to do is go ahead and create a bucket. So probably here, it will show the operations that we can, or methods that we can call off a client. And there should be one here for create bucket. So I'm just going to search for it. The naming of API operations vary based on SDK. So, I'm familiar with this one, so I knew it was already named that. We'll go ahead and copy this in here, and we'll go back and we'll paste this in. Okay, and so now we have our bucket name here. So just say bucket name, and then we'll just bring up our region here at the top, region. I'm going to say CA Central 1, because that's where I want to deploy. And we'll just put region here as such. Ruby should not like trailing commas. Some languages expect you to have it, like Golang. Ruby probably will complain. Some don't care if it's there or not, like JavaScript. So just understand that every language is a little bit different. So we have our bucket name, our region. Those are going to get passed down here. I got rid of that puts as print for Ruby. And what I want to do now is create some random files. So we can use ran to say generate a number for ran. I'm going to add 1, so it's always between the range of 1 and 6. And I'm just going to assign that to a variable called number of files. And just so we know how many happens here, I'm going to just print that out here, say number of files, and then do interpolation so we can put that into the string. And that will print out the number of files. So Ruby has this really nice, easy way of repeating things. So if we do times, it'll say take a number and do this X times. So we can say like 10 times, 20 times. So this will be whatever that random number is. And we'll go here and say each do, and then we'll provide the I, that's the index. So that'll be the number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, whatever it is. It'll start at 0. And so I'm just going to put that out so I can see the numbers as they count up. And I want to make a random file. So I'm just going to say like file _ I, and then we'll just make an empty txt. And then we need an output path. So I want to place these in temp because I really don't like it when files drop in here. Otherwise, we might commit them to our repo by accident. So I'm going to put it in temp. Temp is a Linux folder standard where if your machine is turned off or whatever, those files will just vanish. So that's a great place to put temporary files. That's where I like to place them. And so in Ruby, we want to open a new file. If you're wondering how to do files in Ruby, you can just go ahead and go to File, Ruby. And usually the Ruby guides is really good. So they have a bunch of different examples here as file open and things like that. I think that in the SDK, they might show an example how to write objects. Probably like if we go with put object here, they might show an example. So where is it here? It is here, like opening a file. So that's probably what we'll do, is use that example when doing that. But first we need to actually create a file. So we'll do file, open, and there's like a ton of different ways to create files in Ruby's, but this is the way I like to do it. And so the W is for write, so we're going to write to the file. This here is just file. I'm just shortening it to F to make it shorter. And so I'm going to write to this, and I'm going to use secure random, and we're going to generate a UUID, so we get a random value in that file. So that'll be good. The next thing I want to do is I want to now write a file to Ruby. So we'll go back over to here. I'm going to go ahead and grab this code. This code looks pretty good to me. And we'll go ahead and paste this in. And so I think what I want here is, yep, the output path here as well. So we create the file locally, and then we read it. It'd be nice if we could do it in one go, but it might be a bit too tricky. So I'm just going to keep it simple here today. And we need to supply our bucket. So I'm just going to bring these onto new lines. You'll notice, like, sometimes in Ruby, we can have parentheses or not. They're optional. Ruby likes to look like more like English, and so that's why you're not seeing those there. But I could remove them on these ones if I want to, but you have to know exactly when you can remove them and not. But you know, if they're making you uncomfortable, you can go ahead and add them in. It's up to you. I just been working with Ruby for such a long time. I just change how I like to do that. I want the file name to be here, as we want just the file name without the address, and then we will pass in here the actual file. It can be really tricky putting an object. I think I said this earlier, but depending on your use case, it can be very tricky to pass or write the file to S3. And so this thing, I think, takes a string or an input-output stream. But you have to be careful, because sometimes when you put objects, it won't be the content type you think it's going to be. So just be aware of that. And sometimes you have to explicitly set the content or fiddle with this. But I've done this enough that I'm not going to have that problem here. So hopefully this is going to work. Let's go take a look at our code. So this looks pretty good. Maybe we can go ask ChatGPT to write some documentation for us. That might be nice. So I'm going to go here, and we'll go up here, document our code, and maybe just make this a bit easier for you. Like, I know what's going on here, but it's important that you know as well. And I'll just give it a moment. We'll come back when it's done, okay? All right, so I let that generate out there, and so we have some comments here. It'll just save us a bit of time. We could have handwritten all this stuff, but you know, again, I want to make things nice and snappy here so we can focus on cloud. But let's go back to the top. So we're requiring our libraries. The first one is the SDK for S3 operations. This is for interactive debugging, which is super useful. This is going to generate random strings. This is a built-in library, so we did not have to include it in our gem file. Here we're fetching the bucket name for environment variables. We're specifying our region. We're creating a new instance of the S3 client. For most things in the Ruby SDK, you're going to be doing this. There is some variation on this, so it might look a little bit different based on which service. Then we are creating our bucket. We're determining the number of files we want to create. We are randomizing a number between 1 to 6. We're looping through them. We're writing to those files, and then we're going to upload them. So that is our script. Hopefully there are no problems in here. I'm going to drop some binding pries so that we can just take a look at some stuff. So I'll put a binding pry here, and I'm going to place a, I guess we only need the one, as I'd like to just see that response there and see what gets returned. Well, let's go ahead and run this script. So we did this just a moment ago. It was this here. And we're going to have to give it a bit more of a unique name. My cool bucket is probably already taken. So I'm going to say my Ruby SDK example. And I'm going to put AB and just put a few numbers on the end there. And we'll go ahead and hit enter. And hopefully it will work. What's going to happen is it's going to hit that breakpoint here on line 20. It's going to allow us to write whatever we want. So let's go ahead and just write something. So I'm just going to write RESP. Oops. RESP. And I'll hit Q there because it had end. It was kind of scrolling. Now I get the prompt, and so I can type it in. I hit Q to get out of that mode there when it said end. and we type in RESP, and this is what it's returning here. So you can interact with anything and just help yourself debug anything. It's really nice. I can type in bucket name. So if you're never sure what's going on in your code, you just throw a binding pry in there. When you're done, you just type exit. If you get really stuck, you can type exit with an exclamation mark. If you type exit, it will continue on. If you want to quit completely, you just give it an exclamation. So I'm going to take it completely out there. I'll leave this in just in case we want to have a debugging option, but we'll go ahead and try this again and let it run for real. And we get an error, not a big deal, but it says bucket exec Ruby SDK, or sorry, S3RB has an error. Your previous request to create the bucket name succeeded and you already own it. Oh, did we create it twice by accident maybe? How did we, oh, we put the binding pry here. Okay, so that makes sense. So here it's throwing an error, and that's totally fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go over to S3 and we'll delete this bucket. So I'll just say Ruby. We'll give this a nice refresh. I'm going to go ahead and just delete that bucket. Makes sense. And this is the big difference between the SDK and infrastructure as code. Infrastructure as code would detect that the bucket already existed and just do an update in place or do nothing. Whereas the SDKs are not idempotent. So idempotent means like it knows there's the state of a thing and it will work with that thing, as opposed to Ruby. It doesn't know that anything exists. It's just going to keep trying to do what it wants to do. The SDK, not Ruby in particular, and that's a huge concept to know. We're going to go ahead and hit enter again, and it created 2 files for us. That's great. Let's make our way over to the bucket. That looks good. We'll click into the bucket, and let's confirm the contents of these files. I think that's really important. You should always confirm the contents of the files so that you know that it's doing what you want it to do. We're going to go ahead and download this file. So we'll go and do that. We can't preview it. It's a text file. So I'm just opening up here locally. I'm going to just drag it on into GitPod so we can open it up. And we have a UUID. So this has been successful. So that was pretty darn easy. So again, Ruby is my favorite language. So I would hope that that would be easy for me. Hopefully it's easy for you as well. I'm going to go ahead and commit this. And we'll just say Ruby SDK example. So there you go. So not too bad. Let's go take a look at Java. Java is a little bit harder, but I can get through it. So we're going to go into our Java directory. The first thing that we need to do before we put any code in here is we need to generate out a Maven project. That's something you always need to do. So we'll go ahead and do that. I'm going to go and look up Maven, and we'll see if we can get the documentation. I'm going to go to the Maven in 5 minutes. And somewhere here, it's going to tell you to cd in. And you want to copy this line here. This is going to give us this nice big command to get working here. I'm going to just make a README file here for Java, because Java gets really messy really quick, and I just don't want to struggle. So I'm going to go here and just, comment this here and make this a little bit more manageable. So Maven is one of the tools that you can use to assemble packages and make a project in Java. The other one's called Gradle. That's all I kind of remember about it. But I know that if we run this line, it'll get us set up. And so we have a Maven archetype quick start. I think that's going to set us up with the template that we want to work with it. There might be already an archetype set up for AWS. I'm not really sure. We could look into it, but I'm just going to keep it simple here today. It's going to create folders based on what we call the group. It's a very common practice in Java to name the app, then the company or the immediate project or company, and then the organization or something. Anyway, there's these 3 things, and it will create folders for it. You'll see it. Nothing too complicated here. And we'll go ahead and, well, before we do that, I'm just going to make our documentation a little bit nicer. And we'll just say bash, and we'll say create a new Maven project. And I'm thinking that we're going to have a problem here. Like, if you look very closely, it might be hard to see on the screen, but there's this little gray dot after it. And so what happens is when you try to break a new line for bash scripts, if there's a space after it, it'll muck things up. See? So if I run this, I expect this to break. I'll just put a space here to show you what I mean, because it's such a common problem. I want you to see that happen. And Oh, maybe there's not a problem here. Sometimes when you copy and paste, it's a problem, but when it copied and pasted it into the thing, it made it one line, so it didn't do what I wanted it to do. But just understand, if you have a problem here, just make sure you get rid of those empty spaces on the end. For whatever reason, it worked out fine for me, but let's go here on the left-hand side. Now we have a folder called My App, and we have a source, and we go into main. I thought it was going to make folders called My Company App. I guess it didn't. I definitely know that I've seen that before. Oh, it's right here. Never mind. I was like, where's those folders? Here they are, Java My Company App. So notice it's based on that convention there. Golang kind of has that kind of pattern. Usually you name it based off like your repos. But we'll go into the app JS, and so here we have some stuff here. We're going to need to configure our POM XML. This is where we specify dependencies. You can tell Java is old because it still uses XML. And XML is okay, but I'm not a huge fan of it. But we need to get into this XML, the configuration for Java. So let's go back over to the SDK pages, the developer tools. Let's see if we can go find that quickly. So here we'll make our way over to Java. And I'm going to go into, we have sample code. I want to get started with Java. Where's the, we'll say Java on AWS. We'll try this. Not exactly what I want. We'll click back. I don't know why the Ruby one's so easy to get to, and the Java one is such a nightmare. But I'm looking for that reference guide. That's what I want. Or getting started with Java. AWS SDK for Java. Let's try this one over here. This first one here. We do want Maven. That's right. Develop and deploy applications SDK Maven. Yep, that's right. Here we go. Okay, developer guide. That's what I wanted. I'm not sure why it was so hard to find. But we'll go here, and it should give us some instructions on how to start working with it. So we have the SDK. We need to set it up first. Let's go to the setup. And on the left-hand side, we're going to maybe go to basic setup. And what I'm looking for here is the Maven stuff. Setup, here, maybe it's setup tools? Apache Maven, here we go. So we have a very similar command. Notice it's a little bit different. It says archetype lambda, D service, S3, D region, West 2. This might actually be a bit better. It might give us everything that we want. So I'm very tempted to actually try this out. So what I'm going to do, I know we just did this, but I'm going to go ahead and just delete this this here, and we'll see if our life's a bit easier. Otherwise, we have to manually configure this POM file. I really don't want to do that. And this one appears to already be configured for S3. So let's see if that will do what we want. So I'm going to go ahead and just copy this, and we'll put this down in our documentation. Okay. And paste that in, and we'll just kind of observe what the difference is. I don't want to be US West 2. I'm going to do US East 1. We'll do something a bit more normal. We'll make our life easy and just do US East 1. It looks like the service is S3. We have archetype lambda. We have archetype version, so that's something we'll have to supply here. It'd be nice if they just showed us on this page. Replace with full package. To use the latest version of archetype, replace from the latest Maven Central. So this is probably where the repo is. So we have it here. This says the AWS SDK for Java. Maven archetype for Java Lambda function using AWS SDK 2.0. So is it for Lambda or is it for S3? The AWS SDK for Lambda, the AWS SDK for Java, Maven archetype for Java Lambda function. This is Java Lambda function. So I think it's not talking about Lambda, like AWS Lambda, it's talking about Java Lambda function, which is a bit confusing, but that's fine. So what is the latest version here? It's 2.21.29. So we'll go ahead and try that out. 2.21.29. Good. We'll go back over to here. And I lost it. Here it is, Maven Central. So I assume that's like Ruby gems. It's where all the dependencies are going to come from. And hopefully that is just going to work. Fingers crossed here. We'll go ahead and copy this. Notice the group ID is a little bit different. But as long as it works, that's all I care about. We'll go ahead and hit enter. And it's generating stuff out, fingers crossed. Please just work. Excellent. So now we have our app here. We have our POM XML, so that is good. Let's go take a look at that. And there's some things that it would tell us to do. It would tell us to add this dependency management block for that here. It would also tell us to add some AWS dependencies in here. So we have S3. So you'll find that a lot of times you can copy and paste this file, or there's other ways to do it. Again, I'm not my Java knowledge. Usually, when you use Java, you use like Eclipse or something specific for Java, and we're using a generic Visual Studio Code, so we don't have the same kind of powers that we do with other IDEs. But usually, Java is so complex for configuration, you don't manually configure it. But there probably are libraries or extensions here for Java. So we go here on the left-hand side. I wasn't looking for them, but there's probably something. So yeah, like here, and I'm not sure if it has to do with a specific version of Java. So provides Java language support for Eclipse JDT language server. Yeah, I think I'm just going to leave it alone. I don't think I really need it just yet. So, but anyway, so now that we have that project set up, let's get some code in it. And so what I'm going to do here is just drag this on down. Let's drag this on down here. And let's go back into our main, into our app. So we have this. We also have this dependency factory. So that's going to help set up our S3 client. So we already have that ready to go. So, oh yeah, let's take a look here. So here we have our app. It's already set up for the S3 client. And yeah, it looks like it is ready. So we already have it in place. And so we can just write our code down here. So just give me a moment to get refreshed with some Java S3 code, okay?